Let's bring in Keith Baldry for more tariff talk. Keith, U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra made some, let's call them interesting comments today about relations between our two countries, and he theorized why President Trump calls Canadians mean and nasty.
In those discussions over the next few days in Washington with the United States, we are looking for the best deal for Canada.
At the hilltop resort of Huntsville, Ontario, with the wind rustling gently across Lake Muskoka, an extraordinary meeting unfolded, one that could redefine Canada's political and economic future. Prime Minister Mark Carney sat down with 10 provincial premiers to address not only the growing pressure from Washington, but also an internal crisis tearing at the seams of the Federation, the rising trade barriers dividing the provinces themselves. While the U.S. continues to squeeze Canada with 25 to 35% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other essential goods unless a trade deal is reached before the looming August 1st deadline, the tension inside the country is just as explosive. The premiers were locked in heated debates over a question that has haunted Canada for decades. Can this country truly become a unified, modern economy, or is it destined to remain fragmented and slow-moving? Despite Carney's carefully scripted message that Canada is united and stronger than ever, the Huntsville summit tore away that illusion. What emerged instead was the picture of a federation splintering along economic and ideological lines. Ontario and Alberta demanded immediate action to dismantle the internal trade barriers that have long slowed the movement of goods, workers, and capital across provincial borders. They pushed hard for the full and immediate enforcement of the One Canadian Economy Act, a new piece of legislation meant to unlock billions in lost GDP by cutting red tape. In sharp contrast, British Columbia and Quebec sounded the alarm, warning that loosening these regulations too quickly could undermine environmental safeguards and even spark conflicts with Indigenous communities who have land and treaty rights. One Alberta official, clearly fed up, delivered a blunt warning to Ottawa. If the federal government won't act, Alberta will. We don't have 10 or 15 years to sit around while our economy stagnates.
Prime Minister, it's so important that we hear from you about the status and the negotiations with the United States, and I always say I'll always have the Prime Minister's back dealing with President Trump.
What was supposed to be a strategy session about national resilience quickly turned into a battleground, with premiers defending their own provincial interests more fiercely than the idea of a united Canada. Carney maintained his position that any trade agreement with the U.S. must be negotiated carefully and thoroughly, but across the table, many premiers made it clear that they no longer believe Ottawa can adequately defend their economic interests.
And on the sidelines, Saskatchewan joined Alberta and Ontario's partnership to build new energy and trade infrastructure such as pipelines and rail lines. All three premiers stressed the need for a pipeline from Alberta to Ontario.
Alberta has already begun negotiating directly with American energy companies, creating deals that would bypass federal oversight entirely. Saskatoon has gone further, signing a memorandum of understanding with Alberta to share rail infrastructure and coordinate mineral exports, essentially creating a mini alliance that operates outside Ottawa's control. Ontario, hit hard by rising construction costs due to U.S. steel tariffs, pressed Carney for immediate retaliatory measures against Washington, only to be met with his usual caution and insistence on measured responses. A senior policy advisor present at the meeting summed up the mood grimly. We're no longer just fighting a trade war with the U.S., we're fighting a trade war with ourselves.
It should give us pause that we, in Eastern Canada, are overly reliant on oil that either has to come by way of the United States or has to be shipped in from overseas.
Western provincial discord weren't enough, Indigenous communities added another layer of complexity. Western provinces like Alberta are offering real equity stakes and profit sharing to Indigenous nations to secure fast approval for major energy projects. For them, it's a pragmatic move to speed up development and keep investment flowing. But Indigenous leaders in British Columbia and Quebec voiced sharp criticism, accusing provincial governments of trying to push projects forward without proper consultation, a move they warned could ignite a wave of legal challenges unprecedented in Canadian history. Some Indigenous groups went as far as to release an open letter during the meeting, declaring, "If we are sidelined, we are prepared to take these projects to court. Our rights are not optional." This placed Carney in an impossible bind. Either support fast-track reforms to keep the Western provinces happy, or uphold the traditional consultation process and risk alienating the very provinces driving Canada's resource economy.
We can't chance it any longer. We need to be independent. We need a pipeline going to southwestern Ontario to one of the refineries and be self-reliant. We can't rely on the Americans anymore.
The division has never been clearer. Western provinces are racing to become independent export powerhouses, building direct ties to foreign markets and reducing reliance on federal approvals. Eastern provinces insist on keeping stricter environmental and regulatory standards, accepting slower growth for the sake of stability and legal predictability. Ottawa, caught in the middle, seems increasingly powerless to set the agenda as provinces move forward on their own terms. One political analyst attending the summit described the situation starkly. If this continues, Canada will become a multi-speed nation, with each province writing its own economic rules while the federal government sits on the sidelines, powerless to stop it.
The Huntsville meeting was supposed to strengthen national unity and present a united front against Washington's economic pressure. Instead, it revealed a Canada teetering on the edge of fragmentation. Externally, U.S. tariffs are tightening the noose, giving Carney little time or leverage to negotiate from a position of strength. Internally, provinces are acting unilaterally, forging trade and energy deals without waiting for federal approval. And Indigenous communities may soon trigger a wave of legal battles if they feel ignored in this new race to restructure Canada's economy. The real question now is no longer, can Canada withstand the U.S. trade war? But rather, does Ottawa still have the authority, or even the respect, needed to keep this country together before each province turns into its own semi-independent economy?
It's one of the sticking points for Albertans wanting to leave Canada.
Oh, I absolutely would be for it.
Premier Danielle Smith has stated she is against the province separating. However, this week her government is officially lowering the bar for citizens to initiate a referendum, including on separation.
A question is shaking Canada's political foundation. Does Alberta even want to remain part of the Canadian Federation anymore? This is no longer just online chatter or heated barroom debates. The push for separation is growing stronger than ever, fueled by Bill 54, the new law that has lowered the threshold for triggering a referendum from 600,000 signatures to just 177,000. And here's the shocker, around 20% of Albertans now say they would rather join the United States than stay in Canada. 1 in 5 people. That's not an extremist fringe. That's a statistic credible enough to make Ottawa nervous about a movement it once dismissed as unthinkable.
For years, talk of Alberta breaking away was dismissed as fantasy, but Bill 54 has changed the rules of the game. Now, with only 177,000 signatures, a legally binding referendum can be triggered, something Canada's Supreme Court has affirmed cannot simply be ignored if conducted properly.
But a legal expert says even if the required number of signatures are collected within the mandatory time frame, separating isn't an easy feat, and there are complex issues to consider.
The Alberta Prosperity Project wasted no time. Petition drives are already underway, with organizers confident they'll meet the signature requirement by the summer of 2025. This means Alberta could be heading to its first ever sovereignty vote within the next 18 months.
Not long ago, the notion of Alberta becoming America's 51st state would have drawn laughter, but new polls show 20% of Albertans would actually support the idea. Among conservative voters, who form the majority in Alberta, support for some form of separation, whether as an independent country or as part of the U.S., is as high as 65%. And this isn't just talk. Some Alberta groups have begun contacting U.S. officials to explore legal possibilities. A well-known Alberta lawyer even revealed he had informal discussions in Washington where the response was blunt. If Alberta really decides to leave, you'd be welcome as the 51st state.
Last week, Elections Alberta approved his application, but because he applied before new rules took effect, he needs to collect 600,000 signatures.
The driving force behind this movement isn't cultural pride, it's cold, hard economics. Alberta, Canada's energy powerhouse, feels exploited.
In recent decades, Alberta has been an engine of Canada's prosperity.
The economic engine.
The economic engine.
The economic engine.
Even today, this is a claim you can find right on the Government of Alberta website. It's also a frequent argument of the separation movement.
In 2022, Alberta contributed 14.2 billion CAD more to Ottawa than it received, about 13,000 CAD per person. Meanwhile, Quebec received 13.2 billion CAD in equalization payments while simultaneously blocking major pipeline projects. Alberta produces 4.2 million barrels of oil every day, over 1.5 billion annually, and has a GDP of 336 billion CAD. Yet it is treated as an environmental nuisance rather than the economic engine it is.
Albertans see the imbalance. They carry the country financially, only to face political and regulatory roadblocks. It doesn't help that Alberta trades more with the US than with all other Canadian provinces combined. In many ways, Albertans feel they have more in common with Montana or Texas than with Quebec. It's not just money. Federal policies are seen as deliberately hostile to Alberta's energy sector.
They have blocked new pipelines with C-69, canceled multiple oil and gas projects, and banned the very tanker ships needed to carry those resources to new markets.
Bill 69, dubbed the No More Pipelines Ever Again Act, has created a bureaucratic maze, delaying or killing projects indefinitely. Keystone, Northern Gateway, and Energy East, projects worth $55 billion CAD in potential revenue, were canceled, leaving 2.5 million barrels of oil per day untapped. Ottawa's EV mandate, requiring 20% of all new cars sold by 2026 to be electric, is viewed as unrealistic, given Alberta's grid and infrastructure aren't ready. Rather than waiting, Alberta is taking matters into its own hands. Premier Danielle Smith is now championing the Western Corridor project, a direct export route through Prince Rupert and Churchill, bypassing federal bottlenecks. Saskatchewan and Manitoba are reportedly considering joining this regional alliance, giving Alberta an alternative path to global markets. This is no longer idle Facebook chatter. According to an Angus Red poll, 36% of Albertans are ready to vote for separation, and that number is climbing month by month. A referendum may not immediately lead to Alberta becoming Alberta's 51st state, but it would undoubtedly trigger the biggest political crisis in modern Canadian history. The question is no longer, is Alberta bluffing? The question now is, what will Ottawa do to keep Alberta before it's too late?
The MAGA fault line seems to be widening from a fracture into a Grand Canyon-sized chasm after President Trump called the very MAGA supporters who re-elected him stupid and foolish for refusing his demand to back off the Epstein files.
Donald Trump is facing something his presidency wasn't built to survive: rejection. Not from his political opponents, but from his base and from America's closest allies. At home, the Epstein controversy has fractured MAGA. Abroad, Canada, the country once most tightly linked to the U.S. economy, is pulling back. The Trump strategy of power through loyalty is now being tested by the one thing it never planned for: disloyalty.
Couple reasons. Number one, I do think that the MAGA base will follow Trump on policy wherever he goes. The reason this is different is because this contradicts who Donald Trump has shown his base to be since he erupted into the political scene in 2015. Donald Trump.
The Epstein case, long dormant in public memory, has erupted again, and this time, it's not Democrats fueling the flames. It's MAGA itself. In recent weeks, prominent figures within the pro-Trump media ecosystem have turned against the president over his refusal to pursue full disclosure of the Epstein files. These are the very influencers who helped build the MAGA identity, and now they're accusing Trump of betrayal. Trump's response was blunt. He dismissed the renewed focus on Epstein as a distraction and told his base to move on. That only made things worse. His most loyal followers are now questioning whether Trump is shielding the very elite power structure he once promised to expose. This isn't just frustration, it's a breakdown in identity. The narrative of draining the swamp was foundational to MAGA. The Epstein list was supposed to be proof of that mission. And now, Trump's unwillingness to act is being seen not as strategy, but as surrender. Inside the White House, several options have reportedly been considered: appointing a special counsel, holding daily briefings, even a press tour by former Florida AG Pam Bondi. None of it happened. Trump believes saying "it's over" should be enough. But his base doesn't agree. Commentators close to the movement now warn that 10% of the MAGA vote could walk away, a figure that could cost Republicans up to 40 House seats in 2026. There's a reason Trump is stonewalling. He likely knows what's in the redacted sections of the Epstein documents. The fear isn't just political, it may be personal or legal. And that fear is paralyzing his ability to lead the very movement he created.
We don't want to do this anymore.
Ontario, where Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled a set of measures to protect the Canadian steel industry. The move coming as the steel sector in Canada struggles under the weight of 50% U.S. tariffs.
While Trump faces revolt at home, abroad, his trade strategy is pushing allies away. On June 4th, the US imposed a 50% tariff on Canadian steel. Canada's response came in mid-July, when Prime Minister Mark Carney announced sweeping measures to protect the domestic steel industry. These included strict import quotas, a 25% tariff on Chinese-origin steel, and a new procurement rule: Canadian steel for Canadian projects. Ottawa also committed 70 million Canadian dollars for worker retraining, part of a broader plan to shift away from dependence on the US market. The timing was no accident. Trade talks between the US and Canada are ongoing, with Trump threatening a broader 35% tariff on all Canadian imports starting August 1st. Carney's message is clear. Canada will no longer wait passively. The alliance may survive, but not unconditionally. Donald Trump's rise was built on controlling the story. But now, both the MAGA base and US allies are writing their own. In the US, the Epstein issue is not going away. In Canada, the trade relationship is being redefined without Washington's lead. This isn't collapse, but it is contraction of trust, control, and credibility. Trump isn't losing to Democrats or foreign adversaries. He's losing ground to the very people who once followed him without question.